All right, one of my favorite cities because I have some really good friends in Pittsburgh, where you are, Fred, and you make just add one more to my friends in Pittsburgh now.
Oh,
So,
great.
welcome to the Leaders Who Care series. Thanks for participating, and let's get to it. If you could just start by kind of formally, semi-formally, say who you are, tell a little bit about yourself, something no one else in the world knows that we would like to know about you, and then we'll get into it. Talk a little bit more.
Um, my name is Fred Brown. I'm the president and CEO of the Forbes Funds in the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In 2000, I was selected by the Ford Foundation as a 21st century environmental justice leader and sent to San Francisco to get trained in the Climate Justice Corps. At that time, Al Gore really started to kick that thing off. And I learned a lot of new techniques around mapping, power mapping, identifying targets, community organizing. And I worked a little bit with the BRU in California. Um, and it really, a lot of times, many people in the city of Pittsburgh don't know that background about me, but people from all around the country do. And so oftentimes I'll get asked to lead something, and people will, and here in Pittsburgh will say, well, why did they ask this guy? And they're really unaware of the work that I was a part of in the early 2000s. We rewrote the Transportation Equity Act, TLU, worked with the Bush administration, really got to understand the difference between the pedagogy of Republicans and Democrats with regards to um, supportive programs and entrepreneurial programs. So it was a really great experience for me with regard to working in policy, working at a high level around environmental justice work, and then actually driving policy change that a lot of people would have never known that we were a part of, that really created an equilibrium within the built environment with regards to federal mandates. So I don't think anybody probably knows about that story.
Well, they're going to know now. I'm going to tell people. So, tell about family. You got a big family.
I do. I have 6 children. My wife and I have 5 together, and I have an adopted son who's an engineer. Um, I was single with him. He stayed with me most of his life. He graduated from college with me, and I was actually in grad school when he was graduating from engineering school. He currently lives in Kansas. He works for Caterpillar. And my wife and I have 5 children, a 19-year-old, a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And so we stay pretty busy.
Who needs? We were talking about We were talking about cycling and working out. Who needs to?
I need to with all of that. And so usually on Saturday and Sunday, my 5 and 7-year-old, they usually do maybe 10 miles with me cycling. And so I take them on a little urban cycling tour. And I'm like a crossing guard. I make them ride on the sidewalks, and I make sure they're safely crossing the street. And they like to go because we always stop for lunch or dinner at a outdoor restaurant. And so they'll say, Daddy, can we go bike riding? And we'll get probably 2 miles into it. They're like, can we go eat now? I was like, no, we still got about 3-4 more miles to go. And they'll go, okay.
That's the modern version. That's the modern version of, are we there yet?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Well,
my 5-year-old, I felt so bad for her before I bought her a new bike. She was working so hard. And I think it wore out because after that, she was like, Daddy, I don't want to go bike riding anymore. It's too hard. So I had to get her a bigger bike. But, we try to stay active. My wife keeps the kids very busy, involved with a lot of different things.
Yeah.
We're blessed. They're healthy. Everybody's doing fairly well during COVID. We had a scare a couple weeks ago in their school. A teacher tested positive, so we had to do testing and isolation and that kind of stuff. But um,
Welcome to life in 2020, right?
the new normal.
Well, I will tell you, 'cause my kids are in the 20s. One's 30 now, but and they tell this all the time, and we know it logically, but it goes fast. So we just enjoy every minute, because that's what it's all about at the end of the day. That's what it's all about. So I like Simon Sinek a lot. Never met him. I like him. I like his why. I like the whole bit there. Before we delve a little more into what you do, tell us, why do you do what you do?
Well, that's a great question, Mark. To be honest with you, I felt like I was given a gift, a second chance to serve humanity. I grew up in a pretty rough neighborhood. Almost all of my friends didn't make it out. I was blessed to have a number of unique experiences. I'm a Goveyite. A lot of people don't know that either. That's two things you found out.
Man.
In the state of Pennsylvania, there's a school called the Governor School for Performing Arts, and they usually select 2,500 young people from around the state to participate at Bucknell University
Mm-hmm.
in an Ivy League experience, around the arts. So I was selected in, I think, 1982 to participate in that. I met the Sims brothers. I met the Flowers. I met some world-renowned artists right now, comic book artists, sculptors, painters, ballet dancers, some really high-level figure folks when I was young. And that experience, it afforded me a way as a urban kid to see the possibilities. The other thing was my father was a truck driver, and so I learned how to drive an 18-wheeler at a very early age. And he had me driving when I was in high school, picking up loads, dropping them off. And so I never spent a summer at home. And so he had instilled in me a work ethic. And I remember smelling diesel fuel every morning, waking up, driving the truck all across the country, and realizing I needed to go to school. Like, I did not want this for a life. And so that, and the fact that many of my friends really didn't make it out of the neighborhood I grew up in. And, I wasn't a church kid. I wasn't squeaky clean. I, definitely played on the rough side of the tracks a lot. And so I have a sense of gratitude that I made it this far. And I feel like I owe my community so much, because they made me tough, but they also gave me a reason to be different and to both honor what I learned from my community, but also create an opportunity for other people to have a different opportunity. I realize that everybody is not capable of being self-directed and capable of really navigating the challenges that we have in life. And I feel honored that I've been able to do that and lead by example and kind of be a role model for a lot of inner city young men and women that really didn't have a lot of hope and opportunity.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I always say there's a reason for everything, and I guess that was the reason for the experiences that you just described. You know, I mean, man, I was talking to somebody just yesterday, or Saturday, about all the things that we've seen in our lifetime, the changes that have happened the last 50 years, whatever. It blows your mind if you think about it. And it's actually taken decades um, for corporate leaders to realize that actually caring and or aligning with social impact, environmental impact, is not only good for their business, but it certainly is good for their people, their talent, and, as you point out, their community. It's a true, as we call it, omni-win. But it took a long time to get there, and still a lot of work to do. But we're got a lot closer. So, as you say, you began even way before your college education to kind of get a sense of that. And then you beat me on the number of degrees, which I'm so glad you can win that contest. You beat me on how many degrees you got. You got the bachelor's, you got the master's, you got the PhD, and you got life on top of that. But all about basically serving people in a lot of ways. And then you put it into your career. So you kind of answered one of the questions, but I'd like you to share maybe another early experience you may have had that impacted you in a significant way to go this route.
I would say the other thing is when I started off and on my journey to pursue my PhD, so for clarity, I didn't finish that. I ended up getting married and having kids. So I was working on 2 degrees, another master's and a PhD. So I got a year and a half into that, met my wife. We had our first child. I blew my knee out, tore my patella tendon, and had to rehab for over a year. And that was humbling. And so the other thing I think that was very transformational for me when I was a probation officer, I buried over 50 kids from gang violence. So I was working in the streets during the highest level of gang activity. And I think the breaking point for me was one kid who I had put a major investment in. I thought I made major investments in all the kids, but this was one that had all of the capacity and ability. He just was exceedingly ahead of everybody else. Smart, brilliant, got him a scholarship to college. His mother was recovering from drugs. And so there was this dynamic tension between him and his mother. And I remember working to get him relocated through some connections we had made to get him out of the city because he had juvenile life and he had a contract out on him. So people were looking for him for the stuff he did. And so I was telling him, hey, like we gotta get you out of here. You did your time. We gotta move you on. And so, his mother fell back into drugs. So he felt like he had to go back into the street to protect her. So he started selling drugs again. And he ended up getting shot. And while he was in the hospital, well, he got shot twice. He got shot twice. First time he got shot, he was on his way to college. That got postponed. Then the second time he went out to celebrate, we had got him a job. He got shot again. And so we were in the hospital, and this most surreal moment I've ever had in my life, well, one other one, was I came into his hospital room and he had 4 females around his bed, and they all either were pregnant or had a baby by him. And I was just looking at this situation, and I just was like, wow, this is not going to end well. And so I had got a page. Back then we didn't have cell phones, we just had pagers. Mm-hmm. I got a page, I went to call the number. And this was in the time when they didn't have police on the emergency room doors, because I think in Pittsburgh, at least, they started putting police on the emergency doors after a series of follow-up drive-bys that precipitated into the operating room, where certain gang members would follow the ambulance to the hospital and then walk into the operating room and finish the job. And so this was pre that time period. And I had gotten my text. I went to answer the phone, and it was a warning to me that they was coming to finish the job on this guy, and that if I was there, they couldn't guarantee my safety. And it just like broke me. I was like, what am I doing? Like, I can't save these kids' lives. So I went back to the room. I told him I probably wouldn't see him again. I made some phone calls to put some protections on his room. I started crying, and he didn't understand why. I was like, I probably will not see you again. I said, these folks are going to get you, and now you're in a situation where you can't get up and leave. And so about 2 weeks later, they got him. And so that experience of feeling helpless, like you can't, even when you can help somebody and they have all the gifts and attributes to be successful, and they choose to do other, they choose to follow different thoughts or beliefs, or, and you know, really, this was probably one of the most painful youth experiences that I've had, because I didn't understand why he was still trying to save his mother, who was a crack addict. And then it hit me that that's his mother. No matter what I think about her, no matter what she does, that's his mother. And that was a sobering, you know, at this time, I'm in my 20s. I don't really understand the cognitive framework, um, bone systems theories. I don't really understand um, deferred gratification, in the sense that people do things in a way that may not make sense to you as an observer, but it's filling another need in them. Um, and so that case, and I would say the other case, is I had a kid die in my arms, and that situation, that changed me. That situation, up until that point, you see people, you go to funerals, um, you know people are dying and stuff happens, but you disassociate some of that stuff based upon the proximity, like how close stuff is.
Right.
But in this case, it was right here, and I remember having a hollow feeling for like a week afterwards, and it just it changed the way I worked with young people. It changed the way I saw other people work with young people. It really began, it probably was the piercing of my desire to understand systems change, policy work, because I didn't understand why the system was so broken, how all these people, who some were brilliant young kids, lives were just eliminated. And then the most tragic part, in addition to these kids' deaths, I forgot about this other story. Mark, you got me going way back. Is that they all had families. And so our work was such that you could only work with the kid, and then the kid gets killed. And so you had to separate the work from the family, because the kid down is gone, right? Your reason for doing the work is gone. And so it really exposed to me how broken the system is, because we didn't look at the family as an entire unit. We only looked at the kid we were serving and their ability or inability to meet the metrics associated with that work. And so that really that struck me in a way that I really started to explore, like, how can I get inside systems and make a difference? How can I leverage my knowledge base in a way that it makes a difference? And so I really began to try to explore how I could do that.
So with respect to that, so let me interject there, because those would impact anybody. There's no doubt about it. And sometimes people do have a choice, but sometimes it seems like they have no choice in decisions that they make. And so a couple of questions related to that. You've obviously organized initiatives, you've organized communities. When did you start, like you're saying, you want to start making the changes? When did you start engaging with business leaders to get support for what you were now thinking to do? And what did that look like?
That's a great question. One of the first things I started to get cross-sectoral support for was in Pittsburgh in the 90s, I think 96-ish, 97. Johnny Gamage got killed in Pittsburgh. It was made national news. Um, he was a cousin of, I think, Ray Seals, that was a football player for the Steelers. He got killed at a traffic stop by a cop. And it was the first time I really became an activist. Like, I was doing, civil rights kind of stuff, went to Million Man March and that kind of stuff, but I was appalled by what had happened, and I began to work with Muslims, Christians, Jews, business people around like this this justice issue.
Hmm.
And it began to show me that the system had multiple levers that I was really unaware of. And those levers opened and closed different doors and opportunities. And the levers had, in many ways, preconceived notions of people based upon external locus of control, based upon non-lived experiences, based upon television.
Right.
Um, and so for me, I really began to explore companies and institutions that were willing to be different and have a different moral compass, because I knew that if they expressed the interest in this work, it would add credibility to the work. In addition to, I felt like because of my network, I could help them as well. I could connect them to some of the things they might be looking for, some of the untapped resources in the community. And I felt like it was a positive corporate, I don't know where I got this from years ago. I just felt like it was a win-win. Like I'm a Covey disciple, so I'm always looking at, well, what's the win-win here? And so, and I became very interested in the win for other people early on because I realized that people don't get involved in a meaningful way unless there's something in it for them. And everyone has altruistic reasons for doing what they do. But if we can create alignment around things that has secondary and tertiary impacts, like a corporation getting involved with a political issue, social issue, tapping into latent resources in the community, galvanizing the community around an investment model from a company to do X. I think that triple bottom line kind of construct can have immeasurable positive outcomes unanticipated, just beyond measure.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, dude, you're right on. And I compare it to community gardens. When you start growing things together, something special happens. It's just in here, and it's almost, you can explain it, but you can't really explain it as good as it feels. Um, I love the expression that you have. From surviving to thriving. Um,
yes,
if you're in survival mode, and I'm stating the obvious, especially for you, if you're in survival mode, there's nothing else you can think about except surviving. That's that. And you can't, you have to. It's 1 minute, one day at a time, one whatever at a time. So I know this is certainly could be a whole show in itself, that topic, but um, share how you approach and gain participation to go from surviving to thriving, or even a mindset.
I think what I try to do is paint pictures for people about infinite possibilities and realities. The reality is, for many people, they got a bum deal in life, and nobody's coming to save them. And based upon the journeys that they've taken over the course of time, they may or may not have eliminated their ability to regain a level playing field to be successful. And so I really try to encourage people to reimagine a world different in the role that they may play in it, and what gift, skills, and talents that they have that move beyond surviving, right? Because in a survivalist framework, you become hyper vigilant, and that creates cortisol in your body. It adds to your weight gain, your unhealthiness, and you just see it. You can see it in people that they're hyper vigilant. I would say that half of America is hyper vigilant right now as a result of the pandemic. I would say that
Right.
leaders across race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic strata are have undiagnosed trauma. In my experience over the last 38 weeks, I have not met I wouldn't say a handful of leaders that are ready to iterate. I think most of them have this desire to get back to February 2020 as if that's going to change today's circumstances. And I'm quick to remind them that February 2020 wasn't kind to Black people and brown people and people of color. And so I'm not interested in going back to 2020.
Right.
I think for me, the survival piece, I try to point out to all stakeholders that there's a cost, right? There's an ROI for keeping somebody in survival mode. There's an ROI to their mental health and well-being, to their family, the community, the policies, the policing, the education. And I just try to show people like, here's the cost of doing nothing for folks that are surviving. And if we made these investments, here's the cost and the potential ROI of those activities. And so over the past 15, 20 years, we've been blessed to be able to show people in a pragmatic way what the benefit of making investments in other people provide time over time. And we're currently at a 7-1 ratio in our current work at the Forbes funds with regards to every dollar we invest in the sector, we're providing $7 of services, which has a direct bearing on the capacity building and self-efficacy organizations and institutions can generate. Now that's led us to this framework and this bridge that now entangles how do we engage in corporations in a meaningful way. And so what we've been able to do, for example, to get corporations into thinking about our work, when I was at the Homewood Children's Village, um, I graduated from the Carnegie Bosch Institute at CMU and had this idea about innovation for nonprofits. And so I started something called the Innovation Lab there, and we were fortunate to meet with Google, Thermo Fisher Scientific, and a couple other companies who came into this relationship with us and really saw how we were able to take surviving people and communities and make them thriving. And Google was the first company that really took, um, paid attention to our model and came on board and really to us gave us the lift that we were onto something. And I remember the first time we met with them in our offices, and I felt like they were getting close to wanting to write a check for us. And I stopped the meeting and said, I mean, if I'm wrong, but it feels like you guys want to write a check at this point. And I stopped the meeting and said, if that's where we're at, I made a grave mistake. We're not interested in a check. We're interested in a partnership. A check's not going a check's not going to fix 40 years of disinvestment. You will though. Your commitment to us and the partnership and thought leader would create new transformational models that take thriving or surviving communities and make them thriving through co-creation of ecosystems. And so we were able to use that and it was a great experience because we were able to take the nomenclature of corporations, have them distill it to us in I did the Skunk Works model, where I basically sequestered some of the best and brightest minds in the nonprofit sector, and we took them off campus, off their main course, and took them to a private campus, Eaton Hall University, Chatham Hall's campus, where there's all this sustainability and environmental justice work taking place, to really give these leaders a different sense of what does innovation look like and feel like. And we invited content experts in, and our first one I think was Google, and they came in, they saw the model, they saw the iteration, and they saw the value of our idea taking somebody from a surviving standpoint and moving them to a thriving one. And they saw the metrics, the ideology, and the framework. And I remember my team calling me saying, the person from Google wants to join our board, like just on one visit. And I was like, really? So I was like, well, get the information and send it to us. You know, we would love to have them consider being on the board. And so that's one of those unintended consequences. Like when you do something that's so different that people out from the outside want to come in and not just do the work, but want to jump into your board and play different critical roles because what they're experiencing is so unique that it spawned them to want to take a different tack to being participatory in the change process. And for me, that's what wakes me up in the morning. Those are the things that keep me up at night. How do we do that now? And in particular during COVID, you know, we're approaching 250,000 American lives lost as a result of COVID. Disproportionately, we saw a doubling of minority losses over the last 38 months when COVID first hit in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. Minorities were at a 1.5 times rate. Their white counterparts today, they're at 3.0. And so not being specific about survival techniques have consequences. And for us, they're dire. Like I told my colleagues, when somebody dies in Pittsburgh, it's not a news event. I'm expected to play a role, even though I may not want to. I'm expected to make a phone call, get space, donate money, make a connection, something. It's not as if I can look at the news like you and go, that's tragic. For me, it's tragic, and I'm expected to do something because of my role and connection to the community. And so one of the weights that I carry, which is like a coffin on my back, is I don't get to escape the tragedy as just an event. It becomes a process that it requires me to play a longitudinal role in this resolution. When there's horrific things that happen at the community level, people have direct access to me. And so, and I want them to be able to talk to me about anything. And so when I get a call at night about two girls fighting in a bar and the girl's boyfriend got killed afterwards and, you know, people are traumatized, I don't get to go to sleep and go, oh, that's sad. I'm expected to find resources, mental health support, calming of the community, connections with police, finding out what other needs need to take place. And so it just harkens me to a point where that should be a shared responsibility. No one institution or person should be settled with that. And when you look at Pittsburgh's trajectory around artificial intelligence and robotics, when you look at over the last 80 months, property values have increased in 3 epicenters by as much as 217%. Then corporations and businesses play a role in that rise. And they have to play the same role they play in picking up the prize as they have to play in making the prize, right?
So that kind of leads me to another part that I want to interject in there because you know, my grandparents would always say, they were from Kiev, Russia. They would always say with an accent, as long as you have your health, that's the most important thing. And then they'd say, and education too, and it wasn't like we talk about branding a lot now. It wasn't about branding. It wasn't a slogan. They were talking for real. And I'm sure a lot of us, especially from ethnic backgrounds, if you will, can relate maybe even more to that because of the different backgrounds, some less and more. But so you still got technology changing and with the speed of light. You got COVID, as we mentioned. You finally got the tipping point where more and more people are interested in and see how what's real about the racial injustice, social injustice, etc., and a bunch of other things, wildfires, and there's Mother Nature's not happy. Let's put it that way. So, has there been an awakening in your mind? Now, a corporation can't awaken. You can't touch a corporation. It has to be, not to be cute, leaders who care about that, and it's got to be employees. about that, to get really systemic change. So has there been an awakening in your mind to bring us from keeping people dependent on us so we vote for them, or keeping people surviving, or not enough education, inequality, a whole bunch of stuff, where more people are awakened and saying, this is just not that complicated. It's wrong. And it does take, to your point, not just Fred or Mark or Jane or Sally. It does take the community, which includes that corporation, to make an impact. What's your thoughts on that?
My thought is that there are a plethora of issues associated with that question. No single point of contact can solve today's social phenomenon, in my opinion. It's multi-sectorial. And so I think, to your first question, I think corporations and leaders have become more intimately awakened by injustice. They've become more readily capable of having semi-courageous conversations. But I have not seen the direct result of those thoughts. So to me, they are important, but they don't represent paradigm shifts. They represent pauses in our moral compass about what might be right, and deep conversations about historical injustices. But I don't see people saying, I have a way to fix that, or I'm going to do X. I hear people saying, well, that's terrible, but. And so to me, I feel like it's a double negative, because I think this whole pause over the past, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and other young people who've lost their lives over this time period, there's this desire for, at least in America, for us to live up to our creed. And the election gave us a real indication of the divide that exists deeply in our psyche and our moral compass and our being.
Right.
And that same awakening is a microcosm of what's happening in companies. Like before the election, people wanted to believe we weren't who we are. We are who we are. We're a racist society, and people have picked sides, and people of color knew it was bad, but now other people are realizing, well, I didn't think it was that bad. And we're always saying, well, what weren't we saying to you that would trigger for you that it was this bad? And I think the trigger is now people are realizing, for the last several months leading up to the election, people were very coy about who they were going to vote for, but they were saying all the right things. And so to me, this is an indication that people's real true spirit wasn't being conveyed publicly. And I think the same thing is true for corporations. I think they're saying the right things, they're writing letters, saying Black Lives Matter. But when you look at the metrics, you look at the hiring practices, you look at the lack of pausing systems to do a critical analysis, you look at the lack of people of color in C-suites, and then you see people making the hiring decisions that during the same window. Like, it would be amazing to me to have somebody do a critical analysis over the last 38 months. How many CEOs got hired in the face of this, and how many represent people of color, right? Because in this moment, the arc of this evolution would warrant that kind of paradigm shift, that people would live up to the very creed of the things they said and wrote. I don't believe that that's evident. And
Yeah,
so
it's a great point. There's, not to sound cliche-ish, but talk is easy, talk is cheap. I do believe there's a lot of leaders that are talking sincerely, but now it has to be put into action. So at least there's that, and we have to do it in a way where, I grew up in Montreal, where you didn't say we need diversity, we actually just did it. type of things. I was lucky in that respect because we saw it was like made sense to have it. And so we need to bring those different perspectives, those different minds. It goes back to my original point. It's actually good for business and good for community to have all these things. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out, which means it's
Google,
prejudice, which means
yeah,
we judge very quickly, especially in today's day and age. You look at that person, well, he or she, they can't do that job because they're so-and-so, and so on. And we have these mindsets, and that's kind of what I mean by even a bigger awakening. And personally, I think it's the business leaders who care that are going to make that difference and take on the responsibility to make that difference. And for example, even people like myself, who we put people on boards, we find people to go on boards, we find people to go in leadership positions. But there's also, like we've talked, the next level, mid-management, other positions where you got to put people into so they could advance up. And so, final thing, I feel like I should say I'm in LA. You're supposed to always leave them wanting more so you can have a sequel. We're heading towards sequel here. But let me ask you on a positive note, maybe, with everything that's going on, what are you grateful for?
well, I'm grateful to be alive while so many people, especially of color, haven't made it through. Um, I'm grateful that during COVID, uh, politicos leaned on me for advice, and I was able to, with other partners and leaders, create a cross-sector group of doctors, epidemiologists, epigeneticists, bioethicists, researchers, community leaders to come up with ideas to problem solve around COVID. And I'm grateful that those professionals see me as a leader in a field that I don't have content expertise in. Yet that moment when they said, "You're the leader," I was dumbfounded because I'm like, I'm not a doctor. I have some ideas about how you guys could do different things, but I don't have the pedigree to really talk about how you do your work. But that experience made me really appreciate leaders who are agile and iterative and who were able to see systems and the connectivity of those systems in ways that it doesn't matter what your pedigree or expertise is, your ability to see connections and bringing people together and honoring them as human beings could be catalytic. And so I'm grateful for that work. I'm grateful for all the hundreds and thousands of people who vouch for us. I mean, we meet monthly with Dr. Levine, the Secretary of the Department of Health for the state. We're going to be meeting monthly with Dr. Bogan, the head of Allegheny County Health Department. And these are monumental lists for us because 38 weeks ago, a group of Black professionals would not be taken serious in Pittsburgh around this particular area. And that to me it underscores the problem, right? You got a group of Black professionals who got more experience than many of the people working in these systems, and they can't be taken seriously in an effort to offer their services pro bono to fix a problem you can't address by yourself. And so to your earlier point, I was always amazed at Google's analysis around homogeneous teams and cross-functional teams and their performance metrics, and then how they failed in Pittsburgh to diversify their teams in a meaningful way. That struck me, Mark, as, to me, I define it as in this way. And I will say this to your earlier question. I think corporations are interested, but not committed to change. I think they're very interested, earnestly in their hearts, but to change, for those, except for those well-meaning companies who have the courage to be different, the bulk of them, it requires them giving up something in their minds because they think there's a zero-sum equation. That's one. The second one is, if somebody else that doesn't look like me has an answer to a question I don't have the answer to, I'm uncomfortable with giving them the reins to resolve that problem. That's a problem.
Well, that's a problem of winning and losing. It doesn't have to be a losing. There has to be an omni win is what has to happen. And we have to get it out of our mind that someone has to lose in something. You know, there was I'll just leave it at this because time wise, but I don't know if we've talked about, there was a story about a Ugandan or Nigerian young lady who learned how to play chess and then got better and better and better. And then she got better even more regionally and got more mentor. Then went internationally, and someone asked her, "Do you win all the time?" She says, "No, I don't win all the time." And they said, "Well, that means you lose." She says, "No, I never lose." How is that possible? Well, she says, "Well, I win, and when I don't win, I learn." And I thought that was brilliant.
That's
So,
brilliant.
yeah,
That is brilliant. And that's, I think, leaders need to take up that space to, like, I live near a Jewish community and I've been to bar mitzvahs. Because I live near a Jewish community and been to a bar mitzvah doesn't make me capable of hosting bar mitzvahs. It doesn't make me capable of writing a grant for how to make them better,
you
right?
probably could actually, but we will go into that.
You know, but my point is, just because you experience something doesn't make you the authorian, the authoritarian or the authentic voice of that thing.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, if you're trying to help me as a person of color, my lived experience is of value to whatever we're talking about. You can't help me through your lens without having walked in my moccasins to help me get from where I am to where you are. And I think that's the greatest tragedy in our work is even when well-meaning other people want to help people of color, their metrics for doing so is predicated on their middle class value system and their journey. And it's they struggle with understanding other people's journey, and because they don't open up the space for different and other, they reject it.
Well, you got to taste different foods, is what I say to that, and enjoy it because that's actually something to be celebrated and not be afraid of for whatever reason. So again, all I can say on this thing is you are clearly one of the leaders who care. Right now, you're my top friend in Pittsburgh, I think. So don't tell Franco that, but I think you're getting close. Hey, thank you so much for participating. We definitely got to continue this conversation.
Hopefully there's a round two and we can have a follow-up on what we achieved during COVID. What were some of the bright spots? We're getting ready to start a partnership with Penn State on AI for Good for the nonprofits. I was a keynote speaker on Friday, and then we launched it. Um, a pilot effort. We launched it Friday and today, but it'll do its kickoff event on December 2nd. And so we're moving or trending in a way that we're saying, okay, COVID's happening, but we also want to grapple with if we think we need to be different to survive COVID, how do we need to be different to thrive as a result of COVID? And so we're trying to that surviving, thriving main framework again. How do we get people to move beyond the theoretical to the metaphysical, which is where I think a lot of leaders are, is theoretically this makes sense, but I'm not comfortable moving it into action, which means you're interested but not committed.
I think you're right on. Thanks, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.